that's when you're talking about districts that could be in financial distress, given the seasonality of the revenues. Okay, and we don't receive the same amount of revenue every month. And so you have to account for that, on a cash flow basis. That's one of the reasons why you have, the fund balance. The fund balance is particularly important when you're a July 1st school district like we are, because we have the fund balance, and the fund balance again is a point in time. Okay, it's not, we don't calculate a fund balance, every year. I mean, it's basically when you close the books. And so we don't get a lot of revenue in July and August, but we still have a lot of expense. We're still paying out staff, and those are the highest expense months on the utility side. And so that's why it's important to have some fund balance. And then we do start to receive revenue, from the state in September, and then the tax dollars start coming in the fall.
Okay, I must have misheard you. I was under the impression that we could only have 3 months of fund balance.
No. I mean, you can have much more. I mean, but then it's a matter of, should you have the tax rate as high as you have?
Yeah, I got you. Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Tossan?
So I had the same question that Mr. George had, so I'd like to have that information about where we fall in comparison to other districts. Okay. And you may have answered this question. The 7909, does that include the funding, the federal funding and that type of thing that we get?
That does not. That's just on the general fund side.
Okay, so we're not looking at Title I funds and IDEA funds and that type of thing.
That's not part of that.
Do we have that number as well, what we spend per student on, or how is that measured?
We can calculate that. I mean, it depends. So, like, not all of our students are necessarily eligible for Title I spending or IDEA spending.
So that's what I'm wondering, how do we
Yeah, you can look at that a couple different ways. You could look at it, okay, well, so what is our expense per student on overall? Or what is our expense per student on just title eligible or IDA eligible? And so we can calculate those numbers. Those numbers aren't ones that we typically see out there that are readily accessible from a benchmarking perspective.
Okay.
Okay. But we can certainly make calculations on that.
So I guess my question on that is we are provided funding based on, let's say, the number of schools we have eligible for Title I funding, correct? I mean, we have to...
The allotment from the federal government actually comes to us based on the past census and the poverty estimates of that time at that time frame. And we kind of live with that ratio for a while until things get adjusted.
And then it's distributed to schools how?
Then when we have it centrally, then we look at it just at the campuses that are title eligible. Okay, and so but we have different formulas for elementary, middle, and high.
And do the campuses have to apply for those funds, or
No,
do you guys decide?
I mean, they plan them. I mean, they have to put together their campus improvement plans. And they talk about how they are going to use their supplemental funding.
And then it's distributed that way through you guys. Right. And what about IDEA funding? Is that per student? Is that based on, on need? Need by campus or need by student?
We have broad needs. We may have students who go into residential treatment, and money is, of course, there's a more excessive amount for that than perhaps a student who is in inclusion or a student in a self-contained class. And so that money isn't distributed necessarily per student, but according to the program support needed for those particular students. And one campus may have 5 students in a self-contained class where another may have 9. So there would be higher staffing perhaps at the 9.
Okay, so it's a little more complex than...
Definitely on the federal funding side.
Okay, I think that's it. You answered my other question too. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. I have a question about this slide right here. So this is the fund balance, and you're identifying what things are assigned. And I see that we're increasing the new school assignments, which mean a new school fund that's assigned to cover the opening of new schools. So that, I think I mentioned last time, that worries me a little bit because not too sure I'm comfortable with opening schools that aren't very full, since we've experienced that once before. It didn't end, it hasn't gone along very well. Anyway, I just mentioning that I understand why you're doing it. Thank you for explaining it. I'm just concerned that I don't think we want to go forward with a lot of new schools if they're not close to capacity.
Sure.
Then my second question about this, or my question about this is, if we're assigning funds within the fund balance, if we change our minds, that requires a vote of the board, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, somewhere in some of the materials you sent, there was a term used about committing funds, which is what we're doing, I think, in this, versus assigning funds, and that authority was given to the superintendent. And I don't understand what the difference between committing, which is what we're doing, and assigning, which is
Okay.
in that sentence. Could
No,
you please
sure.
explain it?
So these categories here, major maintenance textbooks, on down, these are things that we're asking that the board would actually commit fund balance for, okay? The part that's been delegated to the superintendent on the assignment, what I would see, the best example of that is actually the PO roll forwards, okay? There, you have a roll forward of all.
I don't know what a PO roll forward
Okay,
is.
well, about to, we have, yeah, I'm sorry, we have purchase orders. So, I mean, the way we purchase our expenditures, okay, we have purchase orders that are put together, those POs, everything that's open at the end of June, okay, we take a look at that and go, okay, which ones do we want to maintain commitment, or which ones do we want to close? And so we won't roll over all of our purchase orders, but we will roll over some of those. But that's always an amount. I mean, there's always an amount, and that's usually discussed in the first budget amendment, because we don't know what that number is. When we,
Well, you might explain, Steve, why that's important, and how if we don't roll over the budget, then we'll use next year's budget with this year's PO. Elaborate that.
yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, the budget, again, is the authorization to spend. And so when we issue a PO, purchase order, we're issuing it against a budget that is open, that can be spent. The board adopts a budget, and so the department managers and the campus principals, they put in those requisitions, which turn into POs because they want to spend money for a service or a good or whatever else. When the budget rolls forward, if we don't bring over the open POs, then the authorization they had for that prior year would lapse, and they would have to use those funds in the current year. Well, sometimes some of those things are material enough, big enough, where, hey, they're planning on it, there may have been delay in delivery or, whatever else, and so we go ahead and roll those into that next year, so they don't have to use that year's funds for that purchase. They can use the prior year's funds for the purchase. And so that's really the whole PO roll forward amount. But it's a multi-million-dollar roll forward, and it just happens year after year after year. And you've seen that. Now, we had a bigger than usual roll forward last year because of just some of the major things that were done. You had the instruments, the major portable expenses, some much higher than anything that's happening this year. So I'm not expecting anything that nearly as large. I think our PO roll forward this past year was $9 million, something like that. So we're not expecting a roll forward anywhere close to that. This district's usually been in kind of between the 4 to 7 range that's rolled forward each year. But that's an assigned number. That's something that the superintendent would have, and that would be part of the first budget amendment that you would see.
Okay, so when you're talking about the authority for assignment, that is referring to those purchase order roll overs.
That's the best
roll
example I
forwards.
could think of.
Okay, and are there other examples?
I couldn't think of any other examples, but we don't have anything else in our fund balance that's assigned. I mean, that's it.
Okay, I'm not clear what the difference between assigned and unassigned,
The only difference in this situation, the only difference really for us is that that's a category where it's actually delegated to the superintendent in our fiscal policy. Other than that, we could have all the commitment ones as assigned. I mean, we could. There's not really any different in treatment from a governmental accounting perspective. The commitment is just at a higher level because it requires the governing body authorization and it's not something that's delegated.
So the way you're setting it up, or the way we're setting it up is for those two levels. So you're having a commitment level, which is going to take board action if we want to change what those commitments are that are listed there, versus the assignment, which is more of a temporary thing. It's not necessarily new action or a change in direction. It's something that already exists, and we're just carrying it over from one fiscal year to the next.
Exactly.
Versus an unassigned, which is everything else that's in the fund balance that you use from time to time for cash flow purposes. But as far as spending it, that isn't done without, it's only for cash flow purposes, not for reduction in the fund balance unless you bring it to the board.
Exactly.
Do we have any other questions from the trustees?
I just had one, and Mr. Bassett, on the slide 2014-15, the set aside for loss of state revenue, 46.7 million. Now, is that that's in the assigned?
It'll be committed. It'll be in the
Committed.
committed category.
Okay, so we still have, right up there, I'm showing 2 months of operations, but we've got a month's committed in there, so we really have 3.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll be explaining that to the rating agency this month, but you'll see that in the schedules. That'll be in the CAFR
All right,
when you see the fund balance on the CAFR and the comprehensive annual report.
thanks for making a complex subject easy to understand.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Rosenthal, do you have another question?
One more quick one. On the nutrition fund. Is that fund balance going to start creeping back up again since we've gone through most of our big renovations?
It could. It could. I mean, especially if we try to have their participation rate go up. I mean, it certainly could. And so if that's the case, we'd have to, look at things. And one of the things I want to look at for 15-16 that I haven't done a lot of just hands-on personal analysis is making sure that all of the allocations that can be made to that fund for like utilities, custodial, garbage, things like that, I want to kind of maximize those to help cover the expenses for the general fund. But those are all things that, those aren't things that we can necessarily dream up. I mean, they'll have to be able to withstand an audit from the Texas Department of Agriculture, since those funds can't be used, for things outside of the Child Nutrition Fund.
Yeah, I'm hoping we don't have to build another test kitchen.
Well, yeah. No, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and there's so many things that happened, at the last hour on the legislative thing. I did not see anything that is going to give us a lot of flexibility in this as much as we'd like. I think that's going to be kind of an ongoing battle.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rosenthal, and thank you, Mr. Bassett. We're now ready to hear comments from the public with regard to the budget or the tax rate. We have one person that signed up to speak, and that's Mr. Daniel Wu. If you'd like to come up to one of these microphones, sir, this one right here, and we'll make sure it's turned on, and you can speak into the microphone. You'll have 3 minutes. Mrs. Tossan will time you, and you can... Yes, sir. And you can share with us your thoughts or comments with regard to the budget or the proposed tax rate.
Okay, my name is Daniel Wu, and I'm a resident of this district. I don't have any specific figure but I just want to express that as a taxpayer. I want to know within the district's budget goal, do you also include a goal that will give tax relief to the taxpayers when you have a increased revenue? I know that every number you put in there have its purpose, but also you have to realize that the taxpayer has a burden, and this year the burden has increased. I also researched on other school districts, and I did see that some school districts, they do include in their goal to give tax relief to their taxpayers. And I also have one question on the debt services. How come this year the debt services increased so much? Thank you.
All right, well, thank you for sharing your comments and questions. Do we have any other audience members who'd like to share comments? Please, sir, come up to the microphone.
Follow up on Daniel's comments on
Would you be
the,
sure to carefully speak into the microphone?
all right,
so
my name
it's-
is Jackson Lee. I'm also a local resident. I live in New Territory. I'm a very much concerned citizen as well, and I had a question on the debt service as well. Looks like we had about 65 million last year, and this year got creeped up to like 100 million, and I just want to see the reason for that. And based on my research on internet, based on what you guys have already published, there's a debt service schedule, basically, which is a principal and interest payment schedule. And the 2015 debt payment is supposed to be in the ballpark of around 72 to 85 million. And I just don't know how you guys come up with 102 million. That's my first question, okay? And the second question, I'm sorry, I came late, I may have missed your explanations, but it's related to the state funding, I looked up the comments or the explanations you guys provided on the drafted budget, the proposed budget, with regard to the reduction of the state funding. It says, reduction due to increase of local revenue efforts. And I want to get to the bottom of that. What is that supposed to mean? Is it what is the story or what is the reason behind, all right, collecting more tax from local residents, okay, in order to reduce the state funding? Oh, that's basically my two questions. And there might be some others, but these are the two main questions that I had. All right, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Do we have any other members of the public who'd like to make comments? All right, then do we have trustees who'd like to make any questions or comments? Mr. Rosenthal.
I wouldn't mind hearing your response. It sounds like looks like you're kind of getting ready to, so, because what I think I'm seeing on the debt service is that's been going down because we've been paying off debt over the years. This is money, bond money that's accumulated since forever. And I know at one point, principal and interest was about 1.6 billion several years back. And so that's why these payments are going down, plus we've been restructuring. And I assume that the increase is because we anticipate issuing debt in 2015-16. So obviously there's more to pay. There's more expenditures on that.
That's
so.
exactly right. I mean, we're going to make our first issue. We're going to be issuing 100 million of new debt out of the authorization that we have. I mean, our total authorization out there is 500 and it's over 540 million in terms of authorized debt unissued. We're going to be issuing 100 million in debt, and so we will be paying off a big chunk of that in 15-16. I think in the neighborhood of 16 to 18 million of that, paying it off, early. But that's the reason why we are having the increase. In terms of the getting back to one of the questions on what do we have for relief overall? I mean, our plan is we want to make sure we're not increasing the tax rate, even though we have the ability to authorize over 500 million more debt. What we want to do is that we want to make sure we can cover the expenses associated with that debt within our current tax rate. And if we're able to, in addition to that, have a decrease in our tax rate, then by all means, we're gonna pursue that. But if you look at that first slide, or one of that first slides that I showed you, I mean, we have that decrease in state revenue, and it's not because we want that to happen. I mean, we don't want that decrease in state revenue, and that's just the way the formulas work out. Even though we're collecting so much more on a local basis, 11+% more, the state pulls back that money. So basically, the state doesn't pay us as much. And in essence, I mean, that's really what the whole lawsuit is about, is that in essence, the state has a property tax that wasn't authorized by the voters of the state of Texas. And so that's in essence what the overall one of the tenets of the lawsuit. because the state really is the one benefiting from these larger property values. It does help us on the debt service side, and you saw that, but again, that's 30 pennies. I mean, the biggest is the $1.04, which makes up the bulk of the local collections, and the state is the major beneficiary, because overall our general fund revenue is only going up 1.7%, even though we're collecting locally over 11%. So I mean that it's we don't make up the formulas. We're just living with what the state has in their formulas as a state agency, quasi-state agency. But I'll certainly be happy to talk to you guys some more about that.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett. Mr. Rice?
Well, Mr. Bassett, am I correct in understanding that our maintenance and operation tax rate has been at $1.04 per $100 evaluation for ever since I've been on the board, at least 5 years? And our debt service tax rate has been at 30 cents per $100 evaluation. So at least for the past 5 years, our combined tax rate of $1.34 per $100 evaluation has not increased. And I think it's due to careful stewardship on the part of the administration. And hasn't the state legislature, in effect, created a tax relief program for all citizens at the expense of school finance? And we're not getting the $5 billion that the state showed us several years ago, even though they had the money. They've learned later to have paid it. And it's my understanding that all homeowners on average will receive a tax credit of roughly $200, which would go, when you showed us your calculation of the tax increase, did you have that calculated in there?
No, because it wasn't finalized. But what's
Okay.
supposed to happen is that we're supposed to receive state revenue to offset that. So it's supposed to be a wash at the school district level. But getting back to our tax rate, I mean, the only districts around us that have a tax rate less than us is, of course, Houston ISD, which has the massive amount of industry and such. Even though they have a large debt service, a lot of debt that they're paying off, their rate is lower than ours. And then also Stafford. Stafford has a low amount of debt, but all the other major districts around us have a higher overall tax rate than Fort Bend.
Yeah, aren't we about 20 cents per 100 lower than Katy ISD?
I don't think it's 20 cents. I think it's close to 16,
19
17
and a
cents. But that's more than half of our debt service overall.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett.
Just to add on to what you were saying, when you and I talked maybe last month, it is possible. I'm not saying this is likely or it's going to happen, but it is possible that with some of the bond financing that we've been talking about, when you and also depending on the valuations, it is possible that our rate in several years, our INS rate could actually decrease.
Yeah, if we continue to have property value increases of 10%, absolutely. We would be looking to decrease that, and we'd still be able to absorb the new debt for the bond. Absolutely. I mean, so it's my goal to do our best to manage our debt and to keep our cost of borrowing as low as possible through some of the strategies that we've talked about, so that we could eventually have some kind of tax rate decrease, and certainly at a minimum look to have phase 2 of the bond done without a tax rate increase.
I mean, what we looked at last workshop, when we talked about the 1 to 2 year term bonds, was it something about borrowing $100 million, but don't really only paying or owing about $86 million or something
Right.
like that.
Right.
So that's pretty good right there. So so we are trying to.
Absolutely.
Mr. George?
Yeah, Mr. Bassett, you just mentioned you will be meeting next month with the rating agencies.
Yeah, later this month.
And we are going to be adding more debt. And how do you feel about our position and, status with them?
Oh, I mean, I feel very good about it. I mean, I definitely anticipate us maintaining our rating of AA+, which is stronger than most districts, throughout the state and within our area.
Okay.
I'm not going to pursue us necessarily having an upgrade, although, I mean, I think it's something that's plausible to get up into the AAA status. But I think still given the lack of longevity of our overall administration and board, that's one of the things that the rating agency look at. I think they'd like to see more, continuity over time.
Right.
That's one thing I think is probably holding us back from being AAA.
Right. And also, even though we are going to be issuing more debt, you are very confident about where we stand now.
Certainly, given our growth in assessed values, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other comments or questions? Okay, well, then, we're ready for adjournment, but I would need a motion for that.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Meeting adjourned.